The morning it started, almost nobody called it a rebellion. At first, it looked like another disagreement, another political dispute, another argument between football executives, the kind of story that appears in headlines for a few hours and then quietly disappears. But this one didn't disappear. In fact, every attempt to make it disappear only made it bigger. And as the 2026 World Cup moved closer, something strange began happening across Europe. Federations started asking uncomfortable questions. Club executives became increasingly vocal. Former players publicly expressed concerns. Even people who rarely criticized FIFA suddenly seemed willing to challenge the organization that had ruled world football for decades. To many fans, it felt confusing. The World Cup was approaching. Preparations were nearly complete. The biggest tournament on earth should have been a celebration. Instead, football's most powerful institutions were becoming increasingly divided, and the deeper people looked, the more they realized this wasn't really about football. It was about control, because behind the excitement surrounding the first 48-team World Cup in history, a growing number of European officials believed something was going wrong. Not on the pitch, behind the scenes. The warning signs had been there for months. Most people simply ignored them. At first, then came the complaints, then came the accusations, then came the incidents, and suddenly the questions became impossible to avoid. How could a tournament advertised as the most inclusive World Cup ever seem to create so much division? How could an event designed to unite football appear to be pushing some of its biggest stakeholders further apart? And why did Europe seem increasingly willing to challenge FIFA publicly? The answers were far more complicated than most fans realized, because the crisis did not begin with one dramatic moment. It began with dozens of smaller moments. Moments that, individually, seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a very different picture. As preparations accelerated, concerns started emerging from multiple directions at the same time. Travel issues, administrative disputes, access concerns, political tensions, commercial disagreements. None of them looked catastrophic on their own, but each added another layer of pressure, another crack in the foundation, another reason for distrust. And distrust is dangerous in football, especially when billions of dollars and global reputations are involved. What made the situation even more unusual was the source of the criticism. Historically, European football and FIFA had certainly disagreed. That wasn't new. Power struggles had existed for decades, but this felt different. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a routine dispute over scheduling or revenue. Increasingly, it looked like a conflict over principles, at least publicly. That distinction mattered, because once a disagreement becomes a question of values, compromise becomes much harder, and that is exactly what seemed to happen. The more FIFA insisted everything was under control, the more skeptical some European voices became. The more reassurances were given, the more questions emerged, and every answer appeared to create another contradiction. Fans began noticing it, journalists began discussing it, former players began commenting on it, yet nobody seemed able to agree on what the real problem actually was. Was it politics? Was it logistics? Was it power? Was it money? Or was it something even deeper? The uncertainty itself became part of the story, and uncertainty creates fear, especially when the stakes are enormous. Because this wasn't just another tournament, this was supposed to be FIFA's masterpiece, the largest World Cup ever staged. A competition spread across multiple nations, a celebration of football's future, a symbol of growth, a symbol of expansion, a symbol of global unity. At least that was the vision, but visions are easy, reality is harder, and reality has a habit of exposing weaknesses that promotional campaigns cannot hide. The deeper preparations advanced, the more those weaknesses seemed to emerge. Critics argued that FIFA had become increasingly focused on expansion. More teams, more matches, more sponsors, more revenue, more commercial opportunities. Supporters argued the organization was simply modernizing football, making the game bigger than ever before. Both sides believed they were protecting the sport, and that was the problem, because when two groups believe they are defending football itself, neither side wants to back down. What followed was a gradual escalation, not a sudden explosion, a slow burn, the kind that becomes dangerous precisely because people underestimate it. Every week seemed to bring another controversy, another disagreement, another reason for suspicion. The atmosphere grew heavier, the language became sharper, the trust became weaker, and then something important happened. The conversation shifted. People stopped asking whether there was a problem. They started asking how serious the problem had become. That distinction changed everything, because once stakeholders begin debating the scale of a crisis instead of its existence, the crisis has already arrived, and Europe appeared increasingly convinced that it had. Publicly, officials remained diplomatic, careful, measured. Nobody wanted to trigger open warfare with FIFA, not yet. But beneath the carefully crafted statements, frustration was becoming harder to hide. Some felt football's governing structures were becoming too centralized. Others believed important concerns were being dismissed. Many simply wanted greater transparency. What united them was a growing sense that their voices weren't being heard. And history shows that powerful institutions rarely react calmly when they feel ignored. The tension continued building, quietly, relentlessly, almost invisibly, until individual disputes began connecting together. What once looked like isolated incidents started appearing interconnected. Fans noticed patterns, commentators noticed patterns, officials noticed patterns. And once people begin seeing patterns, they start searching for explanations. That search led directly toward FIFA, which is where the situation became truly uncomfortable, because FIFA wasn't just organizing the World Cup. FIFA was the World Cup. The organization's reputation was inseparable from the tournament itself. Every criticism of the preparation process risked becoming criticism of FIFA. Every controversy risked becoming a referendum on leadership. Every mistake risked becoming symbolic. That pressure created an environment where even small disputes carried enormous significance. A single disagreement could suddenly become international news. A routine administrative issue could become evidence of systemic failure. Perception began driving reality, and perception is often stronger than facts, especially in football. As Europe grew more vocal, FIFA remained publicly confident. Officials repeatedly emphasized preparation, readiness, progress, success. But confidence can be interpreted in two different ways. Sometimes it signals strength, other times it signals denial, and critics increasingly argued it was the second. That accusation stung, not because it was necessarily true, but because it was believable. Believability is powerful. Once an idea feels plausible, people begin viewing every new development through that lens. Every controversy becomes confirmation. Every disagreement becomes proof. Every contradiction becomes evidence. That is exactly what appeared to happen. The narrative began accelerating, and narratives are difficult to control once they gain momentum. The crisis that initially looked administrative started feeling political. The political dispute started feeling personal. The personal tension started feeling institutional. Eventually, it became difficult to separate one from another. Football had entered dangerous territory, not because matches weren't ready, not because stadiums wouldn't open, but because confidence was eroding, and confidence is one of the most valuable currencies in sport. Without it, every decision becomes suspicious. Every statement becomes questionable. Every action invites scrutiny. The most fascinating part was that nobody seemed completely innocent. FIFA had its explanations. Europe had its complaints. Both had legitimate arguments. Both had strategic interests. Both stood to gain something, and both stood to lose everything. That complexity is why the controversy survived. Simple stories die quickly. Complicated stories endure. This one endured because nobody could fully explain it. Every answer raised another question. Every explanation revealed another contradiction. Every attempt to restore calm seemed to create fresh tension. The rebellion appeared finished. It wasn't. The criticism appeared contained. It wasn't. The disagreements appeared manageable. They weren't. By the time millions of fans started paying attention, the conflict had already evolved into something much larger than a dispute over tournament preparation. It had become a battle over football's future. Who gets to shape it? Who gets to control it? Who gets to define what the sport should become? And perhaps most importantly, who gets held accountable when things go wrong? That is why this controversy mattered. Not because it threatened a single tournament, not because it embarrassed a single organization, but because it exposed a growing divide inside the most popular sport on earth. A divide between expansion and tradition, between authority and accountability, between power and trust. Years from now, many people will remember the matches, the goals, the celebrations, the champions, but some will remember something else. They will remember the moment Europe stopped quietly accepting FIFA's decisions, the moment skepticism became public, the moment questions became challenges, and the moment world football discovered that its greatest threat was not a rival league, a rival nation, or a rival tournament. It was a crisis of confidence, because football can survive mistakes. Football can survive controversy. Football can survive failure. What it struggles to survive is distrust. And as the 2026 World Cup approached, that was the mystery hanging over everything. Not whether the tournament would happen, not whether it would succeed, but whether the people running football still trusted each other enough to protect the game they all claimed to serve. That question lingered over every meeting, every statement, every controversy, and long after the final whistle of the World Cup, many people were still asking the same thing: what really happened behind the scenes? And perhaps more importantly, has football ever fully recovered from it?